What Lies in the Fog, written by Dy'on Lindsey. The cabin in the forest. The cabin door opened with a forceful bang as the man with the thick mustache and the red-haired woman returned inside. Drying blood covered the entirety of their tattered clothing as their chests heaved and exhaled with exhaustion. Their weapons, the man's crossbow and the lady's rusting axe, were just as drenched with blood as they were. The fear that covered their faces reflected just as much as my own. Are we gonna be okay?" I asked, barely able to contain my tears. The sight of their dulling weapons was almost as frightening as the creatures that lurked just outside. "Of course we are, sweetie," came a calming voice from behind me. It was the old lady. She was my favorite of everyone here. Her words were always so gentle and reassuring. I could tell she'd had a hard life, based on the scars across her neck and the limp in her steps, but that didn't seem to stop her from being a kind person. "Most of them wouldn't be able to get in anyway," she continued as she motioned me towards her rocking chair near the fireplace. "Come on back over here. I'm sure those two will do everything they can to protect us from those things." Maybe she was right. "Oh, crap," the man across from us exclaimed through a twisted laugh. He was a twisted man. His great head of balding hair fell long and thin, hanging desperately down his broad shoulders. His face was always pointing to the old window next to his chair, watching as if expecting any minute now for something to reveal itself. Nothing could be seen out of the window, nothing but the thick violet fog that blanketed the forest and its evils. I've been exploring these woods for long enough to know everything never ends all hunky-dory. The old man continued as his eyes shifted slightly to the two at the door. "But hell, my knee's been giving me problems for quite a while now. They'd probably be doing me a favor." His wicked laugh once again sounded. The old man was my least favorite out of everyone. He was mean, always mocking with his laugh, always staring. I wish my dad was here. He'd stop the man from being mean to me. "No need to fright, child. We'll be fine," said the old woman as she reached for my shaking hands. Her eyes cut angrily to the old man. I don't think she liked him either. All right, everyone. I suggest we all take a moment to calm down." The man with the thick mustache breathing continued to labor as he spoke. I guess he hadn't caught his breath yet, him nor the red-haired lady. Their tired footsteps thudded loudly against the wooden cabin floors as they made their way to the uncomfortable couch next to the old woman's rocking chair. Judging from the number of them out there, I'd say we're going to be holed up here all night. His legs kicked up lazily atop the coffee table in front of him as he placed his last 3 crossbow bolts between himself and the woman with the red hair. The worst of them's been taken care of, and the one still out there ain't moving without instruction. We might as well get comfortable until morning. The woman's face balled in anger, but quickly returned to one of struggle as she lay her head back and gasped for air. The battle outside must have been extremely hard. Of course it would be. "Get comfortable?" the old lady questioned as she continued to hold my hand. "And how do you just expect us to do that? We're surrounded by the fog, and all of those creatures out there. Morning ain't till at least 4 hours from now." "I don't know, ma'am," he continued, with now more controlled breathing, "but I'd rather see us all walk out of here with sound minds and bodies. We can't do that if we're fidgeting and causing a ruckus. That'll attract more of the bigger creatures." The old woman exhaled in agreement. "I know how we can pass a few hours," came an aged voice followed by a wicked cackle. "Times like these, a couple of good stories tend to get your mind off of things." "Stories?" echoed the woman with red hair. "Back when I was younger, me and mine would get in all kinds of binds. Through all the long battles, hunger, scares, and drunken nights, we would always gather around and spin a couple of yarns." He grinned as he spoke. "It was always good for morale." For a while, no one said anything. I guess they were all just thinking it over, same as me. A couple of stories didn't sound bad either. My dad would always tell me stories when I was down. "Well," started the thick-mustached man as he looked around the room. "Why not?" He placed the crossbow from his lap to the couch as he leaned forward towards the old man. "Why don't you do us the honor?" The old man grinned. A mother's warning. Don't go into the forest at night. My mother used to always warn. There are things that bite and don't let go. I always listened to her. Well, most of the time. Other times, I would wait at the outskirts of our village until dusk, watching curiously as the eerie violet fog that surrounded the forest darkened at the sun setting. There were always strange sounds coming from within the forest, alluring sounds. Sometimes, I would get brave enough and take a step or two into the fog to get a closer listen, but only sometimes though. Eventually, as I got older, I started packing a bag and going camping in the forest. I mean, I just had to find the source of that sound, right? And I wasn't the only one either. Met some friends on one of the trips, so now I wasn't alone. They were kind of slow, but the forest wasn't as scary with them around. We would walk together, talk, and eat together. However, this one particular time as we all knelt together eating delicious meat from some unfortunate bloody carcass, I couldn't get my mother's words out of my head. I wonder if this guy's mother had ever warned him about the dangers of the forest. If so, then he really should have listened. The Cabin in the Forest 2. The gray-haired man finished his story with a sly glance at me as he laughed his wicked laugh. The very sight of his amused face and crooked teeth made my skin crawl. Why was he so obnoxious? "You horrid man," yelled the old lady defensively as she held my hand. "Are you okay, child?" "I'm fine." My hand slipped carefully from hers. I didn't need to be shielded. I know all too well what happens out there. Have you seen people turn into one of those things before? The grayed man's eyes glossed as he turned his head thoughtfully towards the fogged window. More than I care to remember. His tone had changed. For the first time of the night, he seemed to get serious. It's not something you ever forget, no matter how many times you've seen it. The room once again grew quiet, quiet enough to bring attention to the crackling firewood in the pit. If you listen long enough, it kind of started to sound like the faint growling of the things in the fog. Its mesmerizing glow helped the time roll. A while had passed before anyone said anything. Everyone, just like me, were probably thinking about loved ones lost. I was the one to break the silence. "Why a crossbow?" "What do you mean?" the mustached man asked. "Why not a short bow? I'm sure ammo would be easier to come across, right? And doesn't it get heavy while you're out fighting?" "Not particularly." He reached for his weapon and motioned it towards me. "See for yourself," he smiled. The sight of it up close sent chills through my spine. No thanks." "Bad experience?" "My dad, he was..." Before I could finish my sentence, my vision had begun to blur. Stupid tears. Why did they have to start falling now? I thought I had gotten past it. The man's eyes widened with sorrow. "I'm sorry, little lady," he expressed as he quickly and awkwardly hid the crossbow under his garments. "I didn't No, it's fine. You didn't know." A moment of awkwardness filled the air. "Well," began the old lady in a well-meaning tone, "why don't we tell everyone a little more about ourselves?" The grayed man's eyes cut to her. He stood, suddenly, quicker than I thought possible for him. "You know we can't do that. Are you trying to get us killed?" No, I just..." And here, I was thinking that I was too old to hear any more stupid ideas in my lifetime, he continued angrily. "Would you just listen all the way before you blow up?" Listen for what? More stupidity to spew? Their bickering continued. Funny, I was sure everyone here were strangers, yet the two argued like a married couple. They were both up now, full on yelling in each other's faces. Okay, enough," the mustache man finally interrupted as he stepped in between them. The red-haired woman sat silently, unbothered, admiring the resting blade of her axe. Not surprising. She didn't seem much for words, or people for that matter. She'd probably be the first to leave at daybreak. The mustache man's de-escalation continued. "Let's all sit back down and discuss it." Both parties went angrily to their chairs. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Okay," he began again. "Now, obviously, we can't tell each other our names. That'd be like waving the dinner bell to those creatures out there." He plopped on the couch before finishing. "However, we should at least know a little something more about each other. It'd help ease the tension." He smiled warmly as he looked at me and then to the old lady. "Well, ma'am, where were you headed before we ended up in this sorry situation?" The old lady's head hung slightly at the question. Her eyes seemed to water. "Well, I was..." Her hands reached slowly for mine as she gathered strength to finish. "I was looking for my granddaughter. She disappeared some time ago." Her voice trembled slightly. "It's been so long since I've seen her, and I don't know how much longer I can bear the thought of what might have happened to her." Her eyes dried quickly as she regained her composure. "She'd be about your age now." She spoke as she looked into my eyes. Her hands once again caressed my own. "I'm looking for someone too," the grayed man interrupted as he once again looked out into the violet fog. He was horrible at reading the room. Either that, or he didn't care much. What an inconsiderate man. "Two someones, actually." His nose twitched slightly. "A pair of brothers." He said nothing else, again reserving himself to his own thoughts as he looked out of the window. "So, the both of you have similar goals, I see," the mustache man exclaimed, picking up the slack of the conversation that the gray man had left. I wish that I could say that I was doing something so selfless. That way, if this forest were the place where I met my grave, I could at least die knowing that I was doing something meaningful. The look in his eyes grew distant. His smile faded slightly. "So, why are you here?" the old lady asked. He sighed. "I was forced to leave my settlement after sickness swept through." His mouth curled. "Now, I'm just a wanderer looking for a place to call home." "Happens to the best of us," the old man answered somberly as he continued to stare out the window. "Yeah, well, I suppose it does." The three nodded in agreement. "And you?" the mustache man questioned as he looked towards the red-haired woman. Everyone's head turned. "What brought you here?" The woman exhaled loudly, preparing to speak. Her eyes never left her rusted and bloodied axe. She answered slowly. "The scariest thing about the forest." The scariest thing about the forest. There are lots of good reasons to be afraid of the forest. There are so many reasons that it would be downright stupid not to fear it. Missing people, strange fog, eerie sounds, and unknown creatures are just a few. But none of these are the scariest thing. I'm sure you all know why it's the scariest thing, right? No? Well, where do I start? Sure, people vanishing mysteriously in the woods is creepy, but you can come up with a few things to explain that. Predators of all kinds are all around. As sad as it is, who's to say that those unfortunate travelers didn't just get caught on the bad end of a grizzly's stomach? Of course, that's the best case. And the eerie sounds? Well, most people have never heard a red elk's call up close or the sound of a mountain lion's roar. Of course you'd fear them, but once you find out what it is, then it's just that, hopefully. The violet fog? Yes. Now that is indeed scary. All of these are scary in their own right, but none of these is the scariest thing in the forest. That title is reserved for the tall, vine-covered monument of mystery within the forest. The tower. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. What's so scary about a tower? Everything. No one knows where the tower came from, or who could have even built it for that matter. There are a couple of theories, but none of them seem to hold up. No one has ever reached the tower. Countless people have gone out in search of it, but none have returned. Yeah, that's scary. But what's even scarier is the call. The strange and irresistible urge to pursue the tower. The call comes to a person mysteriously, and suddenly, it doesn't matter the age. Some are unfortunate enough to be born with it. Some get it when they're old. Some never get it at all. Those cursed with it usually try to resist it at first, on account of the stories, but that never lasts for long. The call has a way of egging you on, invading every part of your mind until you can't resist the urge to pursue it. Nowhere is safe once you've been cursed by it. Not your favorite pastime, not your lover's arms, and not even your dreams. It becomes an obsession, one deep enough to completely change a person from a right, good woman into a stone-faced killer. Yes, the tower is truly the scariest thing about the forest. The Cabin in the Forest 3. I could feel the air in the cabin grow heavier as she finished her story. The kindling fire in the room seemed to growl once again. The tower, huh? The grayed man began. His mouth moved oddly, as if the words tasted bitter on his tongue. Ain't too much good can come from that. Everyone goes after it ends up dead, or worse. The red-haired woman's lip curled in defiance as she exhaled through her nostrils. Her eyes never left her axe. Not everyone. The old lady exclaimed with a shaky tone. My granddaughter, she used to speak about it all the time. I know she's still... Elk crap! The old man's wicked laugh had returned. There ain't no way a girl barely old enough to get her first monthly is surviving in that fog alone. The old woman's eyes shot to him with fury as his rant continued. I mean, you just heard the redhead. If the fog ain't get her, then a mountain lion. The old woman was fast. Before anyone could even react, she had grabbed one of the mustache man's crossbow bolts and raised it to the gray man's throat. Hey now, hold on, began the mustache man as he raised quickly to his feet. If we don't all settle down, we're going to end up attracting... Speak ill of my granddaughter one more time, and I promise it'll never happen again. The old man smiled nervously. Sweat drenched his brow as he began to speak. All right, point taken. It won't happen again, he laughed. Before the tension could settle, the red-haired woman was up. her face cocked awkwardly to the side as she pressed her head to the cabin wall. We all grew quiet. We knew what that meant. Danger. A low growling crescendoed outside of the cabin. The woman's axe readied at her waist, the mustached man's crossbow loaded. Everyone crouched lower. The growling continued, eerily circling the cabin as it grew. Whatever horrid creature out there was hungry. We stayed like that, quiet and unmoving for some time, maybe 10, 20 minutes. 20 long minutes of fear, filled stares into each other's eyes. The great man's eyes were the most interesting. They were almost as lifeless as my father's had been. I think we're in the clear, the mustached man began. It's most likely moved on by now. Everyone relaxed, only slightly, as we continued to speak in hushed voices. How much longer until sunrise? I asked. My voice shook. I hadn't realized how scared I'd truly been this entire time. About an hour and a half left, answered the old lady. That was fine. I could surely last for that long, right? Okay, everybody. The man with the mustache spoke at his normal volume. How about we all gather round again and calm down? The danger's gone. For now, the gray man retorted. He was right. Well, yes, for now. He cleared his throat awkwardly. As I was saying, why don't we all gather round again? I've got a tale that's sure to get your minds off things. King of the Forest. The man's eyes drifted as he began. His tone softened. They say that it was just before dusk on a cool winter night. The fog was just beginning to clear, as it does at that time, and anyone traveling the woods could hear it. The echoes of the red elk's mighty cries. The man's low voice lured us, like moths to a flame, as he continued. In front of them stood the hunter. There was always something about him that drew intrigue. Maybe it was the clothes that he wore, dirty and ripped hides torn straight from the bodies of the creatures that he hunted out there in the fog. Maybe it was the way he seemed to only target those unfortunate enough to fall to the fog's curse, like some benevolent protector of the forest. Or maybe it was his smell, corrupted, sad, and bitter, like the fog itself. The gray man's ears perked at the mention of the hunter. We both leaned in closer. As often as the herd of red elk had encountered the hunter, he had never acknowledged them. This time was different. You see, the hunter had come to do what he'd always done, but he was too late. Anyone, anywhere in the forest that night could feel it, the hopeless feeling of despair that filled the air. The leader of the herd of elk, the king, had been changed, bitten by the black beast lying dead at his hooves. How could the forest's very symbol of hope fall prey to the fog's corruption? The mustached man's lip curled, probably in disgust of the black beast in his story, of course. I guess I'd almost forgotten about the hate most people held. His story continued. The herd's concerned nudges towards the king's left shoulder brought flashes of the battle that had just commenced. Their hearts paced as rhythmically as the wind as they looked questioningly upon him. His eyes offered no answers, only more concern as he peered at the hunter ahead. For a while, nothing happened. The two just stared, hesitant to face the end of countless symbiotic years. Tragic. The king was the first to move, holding his head high in declaration of an unfaltering pride to the future he faced. The hunter's head followed, a silent message of understanding. Without a word, he turned away. Just as mysteriously as he'd appeared, the hunter was gone. His unspoken message to the king was clear. When you can no longer fight the corruption, I'll be here to do what I've always done." The mustache man's story paused again. His gaze drifted momentarily to the old man's window. Strange. He acted almost as if he had known those pesky elk personally. For a second, I could almost hear his voice tremble. "The king's worn body rippled with his own unsteady heartbeat," continued the mustached man. "He hadn't given up to the fog just yet, but how much longer would he be able to withstand its grasp?" His mind raced with contemplation. What was he to do next? If not for the worried faces of his herd brushing affectionately against the tuft of his neck, he could have possibly stood in his own misfortune forever. Each elk's gentle caress held the sweet sense of memories gone. From their moments of stumbling legs, the herd had been together. Through freezing seasons and barren times, the king had been next to them, and them next to him. They could feel his worry. The realization of what was next struck with the force of a storm-fallen tree. Their king pulled away. His crown lifted high as he turned one final time to the family he'd been deemed worthy to lead. His final decree had come. Bravely he sounded off into the night sky one last time. Live on. With heavy hearts and renewed conviction, their hooves tapped. As swiftly as they'd always done, they bounded into the forest. The Cabin in the Forest 4. The mustache man's story was intriguing. Something about it instilled a feeling that I hadn't felt too often. "I thought the elk couldn't be corrupted by the fog," I stated in awe. "Normally they can't, but on the night of a—" "So you've heard of the hunter, eh?" interrupted the great man's voice. He spoke with intrigue. The mustache man paused. "Only in stories like this one. It's an old story that the people of my settlement would pass down to the young ones." He looked at me and then back to the gray-haired old man. "It was meant to teach them that no matter what happens, there's always hope if you keep moving forward." "What else have you heard about the hunter?" "Not much, but I'm sure someone like him can't be real anyway, right?" "Oh, he's real all right. As real as you and me. As real as the fog. And as real as them creatures out there. Him and his brother." The red-haired woman's eyes lifted questioningly. "Brother?" "Yes, brother. And I've been looking for them for a long time," his wicked laugh returned. "Why?" I asked as my heart began to quicken. He was back on his feet now, fully engaged. The look in his eyes was of determination. It was like he was connecting dots in front of him that were invisible to the rest of us. "They say finding him and his brother is the key." "The key to what?" the old lady asked as she leaned in closer. Everyone was on the edge of their seats now. "Everything. The key to reaching the tower, the key to getting rid of this fog, and the key to figuring out the forest's true past." The red-haired woman stood abruptly. "The tower? What more do you know about the tower? Tell me." The cabin door slammed open. As quickly as it did, the red-haired woman was pinned to the ground. On top of her stood a creature as black as the night. Its 4 clawed legs dug deep into the woman's limbs. Its bear-like face growled promises of death. Its pitch-black eyes stared coldly. The violet fog that streamed inside of the open door spread quickly. If we didn't close it soon, even more of the fog's creatures would come in. A whoosh sounded as a crossbow bolt flew through the room. The creature howled in pain. How had the mustached man managed to ready his weapon so fast? Amazing. Scary. My heart thudded rapidly as I looked around the room. The grayed man was already making his way to close the door. The old woman was standing in front of me defensively, valiantly staring down the now wounded creature. Thoughts of my father filled my head as I looked at them all. Another whoosh sounded, followed by a squelching pop. The mustached man had managed to land a bolt in the creature's left eye this time. One bolt left. The creature howled once again as it recoiled backwards, blocking the gray man's path to the door. My heart thudded even louder. If only I wasn't so afraid, I could help somehow. The red-haired woman shouted, laboriously lifting her freshly bloodied body off the ground. Her trembling hands gripped tightly around her axe's wooden handle. As she raised its steel far above her head, the mustached man's final crossbow bolt landed in the creature's left shoulder. Her axe followed, flying swiftly through the cabin air and lodging deeply into the creature's gut. Blood splattered violently against the wooden walls as the creature fell to the ground. For a second, everyone stared. "Close the door," the old woman yelled, reminding the great man of his mission. Quickly and cautiously he approached it. As he got closer, the creature rose once again. Its staggering limbs oozed thick blood as red as the woman's hair. Desperately, the creature let out another deathly howl as it slinked swiftly out of the cabin. The old man slammed the door shut behind it. Panic ran through everyone's faces. The creature was gone, but trouble wasn't. The red-haired woman, if she didn't get help soon, she'd surely bleed out. "How long until sunrise?" I asked frantically. "About 30 minutes or so," the old lady answered with worried eyes. Things didn't look good for her. Even if she could survive for 30 more minutes, she wouldn't be able to survive a journey through the forest, especially now that she and the mustached man were weaponless. "Does anyone have any first aid?" the mustached man asked frantically. "Don't bother," spat the old man. "With wounds that deep, first aid would only be wasted." "Well, what do we do?" "I know," I blurted. Everyone's attention was on me. "There's one more question we should be asking before we continue," I began. They all stared in confusion. "And what question would that be, little lady?" The man with the thick mustache responded as he attempted to bandage the redhead's wounds. "Well, perhaps the most important question of the night, really." His brow wrinkled in anticipation. His eyes cut to me. "What happens when a group of strangers in the forest allows a frightened girl from the fog inside of their cabin?" For a while, they all stared in even more confusion. My heart raced rapidly, and how could it not? The moment was perfect. They were all defenseless. "Well," I continued as their faces morphed into utter horror at the sight of my giant claws emerging from within the young girl's palms. "They all die."